as we call it today. But that's a picture of the Magnolia. That's a picture of the Sidney P. Smith. Notice how much frills are on it, how much nicer it looks. Like I say, it was built compared to the Mississippi steamboats. So it was a really neat vessel. And they became very competitive. On the maiden voyage of the Sidney P. Smith, it had left Rome in last of January in 1877, and was on its maiden voyage. Well, of course, he wanted to be able to make some money on the maiden voyage. So when he got to Gaston, he started getting cotton off various wharfs and was going to carry it back to Rome. The tradition was the first steamboat by gets the cotton. A farmer would take his cotton, put it on a wharf near his land, on a landing near his plantation. First steamboat by had rights to get that as a consignment, take it to Rome, and do all that. So that's what the Sidney P. Smith was doing. It was getting towards Rome, and in the case of February 2nd of 1877, that's what Sidney P. Smith was doing. Unfortunately, the cotton it was picking up was already designated and assigned to be the Magnolia. It wasn't free on board just anybody. It was designated to be taken to Rome on the Magnolia because it was owned by the owners of the Magnolia. So the Sidney P. Smith was really operating illegally and taking cotton it wasn't entitled to. But anyway, the Magnolia found out about it, caught up with the Sidney P. Smith in Center, Alabama, and took the cotton forcibly off the Sidney P. Smith and put it on the Magnolia. And essentially, that is an act of piracy. When one ship stops another ship and takes freight off of it, puts it on there, that could be defined as piracy. So that's what happened in February. And in June of 1877, the United States Marshal arrested the crew in the Magnolia in Center, Alabama, and basically took them to Gaston and all that. And I've been following that research since then, and in fact, I never did find the end of it. The story I tell on the Roman holiday is that they tried Captain Elliott for piracy, that the federal marshal arrested him, and he was put on trial for piracy in the federal court in Huntsville, Alabama. Well, that's not true. That's one of those cases where I stretch the truth, use my rubber band theory a little bit. But that's what I was told originally. But the truth was it was a civil case, and as far as I know, it was never settled. Because I'm looking at newspapers in 1882 and looking at the federal court records and the archives in Decatur, and it's just I don't know, it's just going into oblivion. So anyway, we still maintain we had piracy on the Coosa. So if you catch me on the holiday and I tell you we got piracy, just remember what I think about rubber bands and truth. There's a picture of the three steamboats, the Magnolia, the Etowah Bill, the Smith is back there, and the Magnolia is down there. So they're all in downtown Rome. After those ships left, then the John J. Say took over. Again, obviously it's a packet boat, and I'm working on a model right now, building a model that looks similar to that. So finally we're going to come up to one called the Leota. We're coming down to the end of my talk, trust me. And the Leota was built in 1888, and it was purchased by the Corps of Engineers for about $8,000. And it was a long life. It finally sank on Mother's Day in 1945. It had been moored in Gaston, Alabama for years and years and years. Had been a residence there. Used as a club, a tea room, finally a residence, until it finally sunk. But it was the Leota was the vessel that was used by the Corps of Engineers as a tug to pull dredges up and down the river to keep the channel clear. The captain of the Leota was a fellow by the name of Sims, Nathan Sims, lived in Ohatchee, Alabama. And Nathan Sims and his family, lived in Tallahassee. He had a son by the name of Tom. Tom Sims became, of course, his father was a steamboat captain, so he knew a lot about steamboating. He knew a lot about the rivers and the Leota and things like that. Kind of grew up that way. But as he grew up, the steamboats were on the wane. The steamboats were basically gone in the early 1900s. So Tom Sims used his natural ability as a humorist and became a writer. He wrote articles in the paper. He was kind of like a Louis Grizzard or maybe a Bob Hope, maybe one-liner observations of the current events around the paper, around the world in the days. But Tom Sims became known for taking over the comic strip called The Thimble Theater. The Thimble Theater was a comic strip created by Elsie Seeger in Chester, Illinois. And one of the characters in the Thimble Theater, amongst others, Commodore Oil was the character, Olive Oil was a character, coal oil was Commodore Oil, Castor Oil was the son of. So we had all these characters: Olive Oil, Castor Oil, coal oil, and the rest of them, all in the Thimble Theater. Well, there was also a minor character in the Thimble Theater by the name of Popeye. And Tom Sims, this guy was getting to be really popular. Tom Sims saw the popularity of Popeye. He, like they do television programs now, he took Popeye from the Thimble Theater, spun him off, and starred him in his own comic strip. So Tom Sims is credited with creating the comic strip that starred Popeye the Sailor Man. Didn't create the character, but he created the comic strip. And what he said was that I took the Leota, my daddy's vessel, and changed it into an ocean-going vessel, changed the Coosa River into a salty sea, and I took everybody I know growing up on the Coosa River and put them into the Popeye the Sailor Man comic strip. So you're learning tonight about the Popeye saga on the Coosa River. See? Now, if I was on the Roman holiday, I'd get my arms out and everything else. Got spinach? Ready? I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm strong to the finish 'cause I eat me spinach. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. There you go. The saga goes on after Popeye. By the way, one of the things that Tom Sims said, he took, how does his mind work? There was one series in the Popeye comic strip where J. Willington Wimpy was quite enamored with some mermaids. And he was frustrated because he couldn't take the mermaids home. I mean, the mermaids had to stay in the water, and Wimpy had lived over here on the dry land. So he was very frustrated about the whole process. And Tom Sims said he was down at the Coosa River one time, and he looked at a pool of tadpoles, and the idea came to him. So later on in this Popeye comic strip, J. Willington Wimpy was feeding tadpole tablets to the mermaids so they could grow legs, and he could take them home with him. So that's Tom Sims' mind at work. Alabama, the steamboat Alabama, we're in the early 1900s now, and there's an excursion going down the river. It looks a little overloaded, but like I tell the folks on their holiday, if the holiday sinks, all right, we'll just get up on the roof and we won't even get our feet wet because the river's not that deep. And that was certainly the case then, though. The Steamboat Dixie was in downtown Rome in 1916 when it caught fire, and it burned to the water level. They cut it loose, and just about the entrance of the Coosa Country Club in Rome, if you go down to the river and you mush around on the side of the river, you're liable to find metal parts and wood that used to belong to the Dixie. So it's still at the bottom of the river down there. The steamer Cherokee was the last of them. The steamer Cherokee was launched in the I'm not sure what area it launched, but it was never formally launched. What you do is build a boat on the land, you build it in such a way close to the water so that you knock a critical block or two, the boat slides into the water, and you dash it with a bottle of champagne at the same time. Well, in the Cherokee's place, the Cherokee was sitting there ready to be launched, and the floods came. And the floods came up and picked up the Cherokee off its launch and basically launched it on its own. So it never got a formal launching. And that was sad to begin with, but then the demise is even sadder because one night when a number of years later, like in 1925 or 26, a number of years later, the Cherokee was again in a flooded water condition. The pilot on board or the guard on board was not paying attention, and it was out of the main channel. If you've ever been on the Coosa River, you know there's the bank comes in, and then of course there's the river down here, and there's a bank, and there's probably level up here for a little bit. Well, the Cherokee had floated out of the main channel, floated over to the on the bank, and was in this position here when the water went down. So it came down on the bank, and as a result tipped over. And they were hoping that they could eventually wait for another flood and float it again, but that wasn't to be the case. So somewhere below Gaston, Alabama, where the dam is, there is the steamboat Cherokee still underwater down there, it was launched by a flood and met its demise by a flood. So it shows you what the freight deck might have looked like. And that's the end of my presentation. And I'm a little bit late, but that's okay.
Any questions?
I have a question. How big would the crew be, the pilot, steamboat, or do you think so much on which one?
Say that again.
How big was the crew?
Crew, okay. The crew, usually you'd have two pilots. You'd have basically a 12-hour crew. You'd have two pilots, two engineers, so you could operate 24 hours. The trip from Rome to Gaston would take about a day and a half. So you needed to be able, in order to make that the case, you need to kind of pair it up. You'd have a mud clerk who's in charge of making sure the freight came on board. You'd have a captain who's in charge of everything. He might get paid more, but the pilot had the skills. The pilot was really probably the best. He had to be a good riverboat man. He had to be able to read the river. And then you had roustabouts. You had regular crew that would help upload and offload the freight and feed the boilers. So you might have 12 people on board for a crew. And then even then you might, as you approach land, or approach dock, like if you're coming around the bend in Rome and you're approaching downtown Rome, the announcement would go out, or somebody would see you coming, and you had a steamboat coming, and if you're lucky, you got down to the river, got in line, you might have a job that day helping unload the steamboat. If not, then you might have to just wait till next time. So steamboats were a vital part of the economy, because if you've got a steamboat, you wouldn't put enough wood on board to go all the way to Greensport if you left Rome. You'd expect to be able to buy, haul in your fuel on as you go down. You wanted to pack it full of freight. That was where you got the money. So you minimized the amount of fuel that you had on board. So all the plantations between Rome and Greensport, Alabama, probably were in the business of providing timber or firewood for the boats. And they'd have them at their specified landing where the boat could come by and maybe just take in a little barge full of wood to go with it. And they just had deals with the plantation. So it was a widespread economic impact. If you were in Center Alabama, you wanted to come to Rome, you knew the steamboat was coming through, you'd wave a lantern or a flag, the steamboat would come over, and you'd pay your money, get on board, and if you had enough money, you could stay on the passenger deck. If not, you'd stay on the freight deck and sleep on a cotton bale and with cows and pigs and roustabouts and everything else. So it was a neat time of history. It's really fun to study. Anything else? Oh, you do? It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.